Also, just to note that if anybody wants to share anything or ask anything throughout the session, if you wouldn't mind just popping a note into the chat, we are going to be monitoring it. So we might get to it straight away or towards the end, just depending on what you want some discussion around. So please do make use of that. Yeah, and thank you so much, Helen, for providing this opportunity to engage with everyone today. We're really looking forward to sharing a bit about our academic support and how we are coping post-COVID. It does seem like quite a relevant topic at this time. Actually, yesterday there was supposed to be the post-COVID consequences conference, which I was really looking forward to attending as well, just to compare and see. But unfortunately, this was postponed due to the threats in Sandton. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with that in January. So if anybody wants to know more about that, it's being hosted by Professional Minds and looks like it could also be very interesting. But also besides that, there's also been so many talks worldwide about how COVID has created these learning losses and impacted schools. And actually, in 2021, UNESCO warned that there would be a generational catastrophe if policymakers fail to prioritize education recovery. So we know that this is something that is important, and we would like to share some ideas around our educational recovery and academic support at this time. And we hope that through sharing some of our experiences, we can provide opportunities to learn from each other, which is what we really love about these academic support cluster meetings. Before we get into this, though, I would just like to introduce you to the members of our team who will be presenting today. So yes, it'll be Kim and I. So Kim and I both, as we said, work in the junior school. I focus predominantly on InterCent phase, and Kim mainly on foundation, though we cross over and discuss and work closely together. Also, there's Angela Moore. She assists with our academic support in the individualized learning program in the foundation phase. And Caitlin McDonald is one of our academic support therapists who assists with both foundation and InterCent phase. Unfortunately, our headmistress of our junior school, Bethan Newkirk, and our deputy heads, Narasha Maestri and Martin Makides, are not able to join us here today. They've actually got a staff development on, so they do send their apologies. So we, as at St. Andrews, run from preschool to senior school, but today, as we mentioned, our focus is predominantly on junior school and how we're running recovery and support in that space. But our senior school therapists are joining us today. So if there are any questions around this, hopefully they can jump on to answer. We are an all-girls school, and it is predominantly a mainstream inclusive environment. Of course, we do cater for children with barriers to learning where we have the means to. And our support setup has looked a bit different since we had the lockdowns in 2020 and 2021. We're still feeling the repercussions, which is a bit of what we want to talk about today. Just to grasp what we are currently experiencing with our girls, I think it's really important, of course, to reflect on where we have been, which can, I think, easily slip our minds as we are all very happy with the notion that things have returned in some sense to how they were before COVID. You know, we're not wearing masks, we're not having to social distance, but we can't really say that things are the way they were before COVID because of the impact and long-term effects it's had on many of us. So what did we see in our school during the pandemic? Well, focusing on the academic side, our school and our teachers, I feel, did such an incredible job at this stage. They adapted to the situation, they set up their online classrooms in no time at all, and school just seemed to keep on going. But saying this, school didn't really keep on going quite as efficiently as it would have in person. And there are numerous reasons for that. And no doubt you all had similar and many other experiences. There are just so many to name, but we wanted to provide a few examples of some of the things that we experienced during the time of COVID. So for instance, some of our students struggled with connectivity and they experienced technical glitches. Some children would just turn off their cameras. They just didn't want to engage. There were multiple distractions at home. There were dogs barking, siblings around. They didn't have enough space to work. Every household was very different. There were also some parents or and adults who just weren't able to supervise and assist the learners. And this really affected our younger ones who needed more support at this time, or the ones who had barriers to learning. And some of the children with learning difficulties just couldn't be monitored as closely as they would have been if they were at school. I can hear the rain is picking up, so I hope you can all hear me, but there is a big storm on this side, so I hope it doesn't interfere. If you need me to talk up, just say so, okay? We also found that some of our teachers had to really chase down students to hand in assignments, noting that some of the assignments may have actually have been completed by their parents or an au pair. You had the parents who didn't have the capacity to assist their students, their children, and those that were overly involved, so much so that they actually did the homework for them and their children became quite dependent on them at that time. And then, of course, the virus itself brought on sickness, affected energy levels, cognitive areas, and also there was the time off from work and school. And not to mention screen time. So we know the screen exposure, and now they've seen that it's impacted vision. So it caused in some kids nearsightedness, that myopia, and also some eye strain. But we know that it also was such an important tool at this time because it actually helped hold the children both emotionally and allowed us to continue with school. So it had its pros and its cons. But at the same time, all that screen exposure and screen time that our kids just got involved with, they've actually found that it has impacted brain development in our children. So that's something that we also have to think about at this time. Also, what we had a lot of new students joining us during COVID. It was very difficult for us to track where they were at and what the quality of their online learning had been. I think all children were hard hit, but there were some grades that seemed to be particularly hard hit. And I think of our grade 3s at this time. They went in as grade 3 foundation phase and they came out as grade 5s, writing their exams. And that's where we are picking up quite a lot of issues with our grade 5s at this time. Grade 4, we know, is such a huge transition period. And that was completely interrupted. So even, for example, that idea of teaching our children to plan and move between different classes, that was all put on pause. And all of a sudden, in 1 year, they suddenly had to start from scratch and learn and become familiar with so much in such a small amount of time, really. We obviously also had families who suffered losses and children who struggled with anxiety. And of course, this all impacted on academics as well. Our children who entered grade 0, which is big school, they had massive physical and social spaces between them. And for a long time, they didn't even know what their teacher or many of their peers even looked like behind the mask, which is very sad to think about, and something we reflect back on. So when we came out of COVID, there were a lot more children with far greater gaps in their learning than there had been before. And it was really difficult at this point to determine which of these children had specific learning difficulties and which actually just had gaps simply by virtue of the challenges of being online. We found it really hard to track students online during the lockdowns. We still met regularly during the week with our MDT and our teachers and our heads. And we did start red flagging students who were not attending or not submitting assignments. And you know, our MDT struggled because for them, they had, particularly our OTs, many parents were actually afraid to send their children for therapies, or they had financial constraints during that time. So the attendance in therapies during those 2 years was also very poor. When children did return to school, many of them got sick, either from COVID or just other random viruses. And actually, even now, many of our children are taking time off sick, and I'm not sure if it's because of stress or their immune systems adjusting back. I'm not sure what it is, but it does seem quite a lot at the moment. And of course, that's just more catching up we need to do. So we really felt that this picture that's being displayed on the PowerPoint, we included it because we feel it captures how our students may be feeling. Like there are just so many obstacles getting in the way of their achieving success in their learning. And really, this can be very defeating. And I think it can possibly lead to a lack of drive, which we're also seeing in many of our students. But this wasn't just something that we're seeing now. It was actually it's a worldwide problem. In America, the World Economic Forum shows that low poverty schools lost approximately 7 to 10 weeks of in-person instruction due to the lockdowns. And those are the ones that actually managed with online curriculum and opened up more quickly. But for those that were high poverty schools, which were slower to open, it was actually 10 to 19 weeks that they missed. And that is significant and not easy to catch up on. Considering we have many students who are missing possibly up to 19 weeks or more in-person instruction is quite staggering. And then in South Africa, UNICEF has actually said that schools have lost about 54% learning time and about 75% to a full year behind, which is staggering. It's a really shocking statistic. So what we would really love to know is what you experienced with your students at this time, what might have affected them academically. So please do share in the chat if you experienced anything different to what we've also mentioned. And we'd love to compare and just share notes and see when we get to that chat in the end. So please do share. So Kim, over to you.
Sorry, I'm just aware of the lightning. So just to continue with this picture, there was, of course, a sort of grace period when we arrived back, where we allow time for children to catch up and allow time for teachers to identify where real challenges and learning difficulties existed. So at the beginning of this year, we started to really see therapies resuming and gaps beginning to be plugged. However, we know that those gaps in some cases were like chasms at this stage. And there were a lot more children struggling to keep up with the curriculum. And as our school does pride itself on its academic achievements, there is quite a push to get the children back on track so that they will be ready to transition smoothly into the next year. However, where we are at now is that whilst many of our students are back on track, academically, there is still so much work to be done. And I know that Angela will speak more to this soon. But what we are really seeing are the social and emotional lags and children who are really struggling to self-regulate. There are still quite high levels of anxiety in our girls, particularly as the pace of learning gradually begins to pick up, and particularly when it comes to exam times, which is where we are now. We are at now. So we know that anxiety can affect working memory and a child's ability to focus and learn new material. So these are just some of the very many COVID symptoms that we are still seeing lingering amongst some of our girls. So we wanted to show you a brief overview of the team that we have that has been very hard at work getting our students back on track during this time. So I have no doubt that this probably looks very similar in other schools, but just to share that our multidisciplinary team comprises of our psychologists, which Anna mentioned work from preschool into the senior school, but focusing today on the junior school. So although we focus on whole school community outreach and support on emotional and academic levels to our children, parents, staff, and the wider community. So in the junior school, we have 2 psychologists, 2 occupational therapists, 2 academic support therapists, 2 speech therapists, and these are all on site in our therapy center. So the children can come during the school day or before or after if they are in the innocent phase. We also have our ILP coordinator. So we do meet quite regularly to discuss children's progress and various interventions. We also consult quite a lot with outside medical and other professionals, psychiatrists, audiologists. There's a variety of professionals that we do work with, as well as the teachers and parents to guide the interventions that we implement for a specific learner in the classroom. Our deputy heads play a very strong role in tracking students' academic progress and flagging children who seem to be presenting with learning difficulties. So this looks largely how it did pre-COVID, except for the addition of the ILP coordinator, Mrs. Angela Moore. So I think that it would be a good time to now ask Angela to please share how things work from this side in terms of academic support. So thank you, Angela.
Thank you so much, Kim. Good afternoon, everyone. It is so wonderful to have you all online with us today. So on your screen, you will notice a picture of our ILP umbrella with 3 programs which branch off of this umbrella. ILP is our umbrella term, and we have our 3 facets which make up the whole of ILP, being individual ILP lessons, RAVO, and language enrichment. So I will give a brief overview of each program. So what is ILP and how did ILP come about at our school? ILP stands for the Individualized Learning Program. This program was introduced to our junior primary school in January 2022. Last year, as we were no longer having as much remote learning and hybrid learning, many of our teachers were noticing a decline of our girls' academic performance levels, especially with working memory, sounds, independent activities seemed to be a daunting task for some, and consolidation became a must and not a nice to have anymore. So even though our girls were attending bridging classes after school, which would be our extra lessons, and other therapies, we felt that this was just not enough, and ILP was born. So my first step in establishing our new program was to see what other schools had implemented both pre-COVID and post-COVID. I had arranged meetings in person and online with many different schools, both locally and in the wider area. And this was so interesting because it was noted that every single school was experiencing exactly the same as us. And they were all putting similar measures in place, which was just so wonderful to see. The therapists and I were also able to bounce ideas off each other, and we could say, oh, this is what I do, and oh, what a lovely idea. Our children would really enjoy that. So it was really fruitful because we all ultimately want the same. And this was really evident at every school for every learner to catch up and recover academically after COVID. The path to identifying which girls would be suitable ILP candidates were clearly outlined to our staff beforehand. So they couldn't just say, oh, well, she's not coping, she can just go to ILP and not attend bridging lessons or any therapies. We had to ensure that the girls were receiving some kind of other support already, whether it be OT, speech, play therapy, and then of course a very important one was parental support. So we needed parents to back us up as well, and they would need to give permission for their daughter to attend my sessions during their school day. So girls come to me one-on-one individually, once or twice a week, depending of course on what consolidation needs are required. So these classes are intended to fill the gaps and help the girls catch up. And we like to look at it as like a band-aid time in their journey of learning. It is purely for consolidation purposes, and a range of activities are offered. Incidental learning is the aim. So learning whilst having fun. These classes are timetabled for each girl during their school day, so they come when they won't miss out on a formal learning period, such as a reading period, and they are identified by their teachers. And this is offered to the grade 0 to 4 children. As the year is coming to an end, we've noted that our ILP program has been very successful. I start with a baseline assessment for every girl who joins, and then they are reassessed just after midterm break in the second term, and then again after midterm break in the third term. And it has been so wonderful to see the progress. I also, of course, work very closely with the teachers and therapists, and I do rely heavily on them to let me know how our children are doing, and if there are any new concepts which need to be revisited, or even forward teaching. where I'm able to give the child a heads up of what will be taught in the coming lessons so that it is not too overwhelming for them. If I feel that a learner is not where they should be, after a roundtable meeting with our head of department and the child's teacher, I then refer to Caitlin, our academic support therapist, who will do a little bit more therapy work rather than consolidation work. Currently, progress is noted, but our ILP program will need to continue into next year. We really feel we need to get our girls almost working at school fit again, if that makes sense. Some girls also require more sessions during the week, which we will obviously address this next year. And then I just wanted to briefly explain the other two branch-off programs of ILP. So we have our RAVO, which stands for Retrieval, Automaticity, Vocabulary, Engagement, Orthography. This is a reading intervention and remediation program. Its purpose is to close the reading gap and assist girls in reaching their full reading potential. So they are taken in small groups, no more than 6 girls at a time. And these classes are also timetabled and occur during the school day, generally first thing in the morning. And this is offered to the grade 2 and 3 girls 3 times per week. Finally, our language enrichment classes. These sessions are offered to our grade 0 to 3 girls who are second and third English language learners who require support specifically with spoken English language. Incidental learning is also our aim and includes many games, dialogues, action songs, crafts, show and tell, etc. And these girls are also identified by their teacher and are sent to me after school as part of their extramural program. Currently, we have about 20 girls in our language enrichment classes. Some girls attend all 3 programs, ILP, RAVO, and language enrichment. Some girls attend only 2 and some only 1. It just depends on their needs. Thank you, everyone. It has been an absolute pleasure. I will now hand over to Caitlin, our academic support therapist. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm the academic support therapist in the foundation phase and InterSyn phase. My role is to provide learning support in the areas of maths, English, and study skills. Students are referred to me for a diagnostic scholastic assessment. And in this assessment, I do cover the areas of maths and English. But if a special request is made for an assignment, an assessment just to be made for maths, then I just cover that area. Regarding the curriculum-based assessments for maths, I do link it, align it with the CAPS curriculum. I cover the areas of mental maths. I conduct a metacognitive interview to gain an understanding of how the child perceives their ability to do maths. And one thing that I've picked up from these assessments is that maths anxiety is on the increase. It's having a negative impact on the learner's performance in tests, exams, and in the classroom. And it's obviously downgrading their confidence within themselves. Regarding the English assessments, I do assess oral language, which includes the receptive and expressive components. In reading, I use a variety of assessments to work on reading comprehension and individual word reading, as well as understanding and memory of what the children read. In the spelling section, I do cover dictation and spelling words, and then in the writing, I also give them a curriculum-based assessment where they have to provide a written piece for me. Generally, what I'm seeing is that there's a drop in their marks and a lack of motivation and a lack of drive, as Anna mentioned earlier in the presentation. So this does show the need for additional support. I've also picked up on poor working memory. So it's the learners are struggling to work with the knowledge and do something with it. And in general, there's also just gaps. So sometimes in some cases, I have to go back to the concept and the content that was covered in previous grades, get that foundation in place, and then I can move on to the grade that they are in. Just linking to the lack of drive, I do find that one of the learners expressed to me that they're always trying and trying and trying. When they get the results back, they see no improvement. So the approach now is like, I keep on trying. Why must I keep on trying if I'm not seeing any improvement? So it's just that sometimes learners aren't entirely aware of their learning styles and preferences. So that's also one factor that's contributing towards a lack of motivation. And another factor that could be contributing to this lack of motivation is that they're just feeling so overwhelmed and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to help themselves. I also do work closely with the teachers. So if there's a cycle test coming up, then I do follow up with the teacher and see what areas are they covering in the test, so then I can address it in my sessions with the specific learner. Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Hi, Crystal. Okay, it's just gone down for his afternoon nap, so no interruption now. Okay, yeah.
Hi, just a reminder, can everyone just check that they are muted? Thanks. Thanks, Angela. Thank you, Caitlin. So if anyone has any questions for Angela and Caitlin, please just pop it into the chat as well. So when looking at the broader picture of interventions implemented in schools, there's actually good evidence to support the use of structures like tutoring and ILPs. So here is a graph from the World Economic Forum that's driving research on which interventions are having the most impact in schools. This is mostly in America, but I do think that though it's a different context, it is interesting research and it might relate to our context as well. You can see that there's the black bar is actually the school drops due to COVID, and the various interventions being looked at are the blue ones, which are such as like summer programs, reduction in class size, and then also the tutoring. So this graph here is looking at maths COVID-19 test scores. And you can see that actually the one that's having the highest impact is the tutoring. So looking across the interventions, the tutoring seems to be the one that's closing the gaps most significantly. Again, when you look at the following graph, you've got the reading. This is looking particularly at reading post-COVID. So if you look at the COVID test scores, the drops in test scores, again, there's all the interventions, and you see that tutoring is having the highest impact. And based on the current research and best practices, high impact tutor programs tend to include high dosage delivery. So that would be like 3 or more sessions per week of required tutoring. They would have a stated focus on that tutor-student relationship, which is very important. Use of formative assessments to monitor student learning, alignment with the school curriculum, and formalized tutor training and support. So I think that that's being covered quite nicely in the ILP, and it's just something for us to hold in the back of our mind as well. Of course, ILP is running in the foundation phase at the moment, and in the InterSend phase, our grade 4s to 7s, for those children who are falling behind despite interventions in the classroom, they might be invited to what we call bridging lessons, which involves a small class setup. And if there's still evidence that they aren't keeping up despite the bridging lessons, then discussions are had about the best way forward. It might involve a referral for a full psychoeducational assessment, or a referral to Caitlin or our other academic support teacher, Helen. And that's where they're going to receive the most intensive support at that time. But as I think, Angela, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but I think there is discussion on including the ILP in this InterSend phase next year if we aren't seeing improvements and children are still falling behind. So that is something we are looking at as well, should that become a need. We also in the InterSend phase provide those concessions and the accommodations for our grade 4 to 7s and exams and cycle tests, but this is only if they've received recommendations for this from a full psychoeducational assessment. Okay, so whilst we're part of a bigger team that supports teachers, I can't fully speak to how they run things in the classroom. But in the InterSend phase, they do also do a baseline assessment at the beginning of the school year, and then another one 6 months later to assess their reading comprehension, the spelling, the writing skills, as well as also their maths. And the reading test at this stage is standardized and provides an age range, but our maths baseline assessment doesn't at this stage. But it is something we want to implement next year so we can really better gauge progress in this area.
And in the foundation phase, we rely on a triangulation of communication, but each learner is really assessed by the use of the different screenings that they need. But what we start off with the base is the school readiness assessment. And from there, we take each case according to individual needs and context when it comes to adaptations of learning and teaching. So from there, screenings and further supports and investigations, therefore, are case managed quite tightly and monitored very closely by the full team. And it's very much a case-by-case basis. And the same would apply in the InterSyn phase. The teachers use various teaching methodologies they implement, but are leaning a lot on the Kagan Cooperative Learning Program at this moment, as this provides a very fun way to allow for differentiated learning, whilst also building social, emotional skills and self-confidence. So Kagan assists in making it possible to simultaneously challenge some students and support others in the same setting. It changes how a teacher teaches a subject and draws on different modalities, so catering for the various learning styles, and also allows for necessary brain breaks during lessons to keep students focused. All of our teachers have been trained in this and have started implementing this here and there throughout their day. So just going to jump ahead. So as mentioned before, the academic progress of our students can't be seen in isolation. We are fully aware of the consequences of COVID on emotional, social, and psychological well-being of our entire whole school community. COVID has been described as an adverse childhood event, and it has caused stress and trauma for so many children, let alone the adults in their world. We know that the psychological well-being impacts on the academic performance. And so this is something in the junior school that Anna and I have been working at and working on. We have been engaging a lot with others and doing research on this. And what is speaking to Anna and I the most is mindfulness. It is really something that we are now being specifically trained on, with the aim of incorporating more heavily in our wellness curriculums. So we know that there's been so much research on mindfulness, and you've probably all heard of it or are already implementing this in your schools, but it is shown to reduce stress, anxiety, depression, burnout, as well as improve focus, academic performance in students. It helps children with their self-regulation and has really been shown to increase resilience. So really what it does is it facilitates acceptance of those uncomfortable, difficult, and very painful experiences we may have. And what we do is we allow them to simply be, feeling them as if they are without judgments and being present with them until we are ready to let go, and thereby opening ourselves to new experiential and behavioral possibilities. And of course, this takes time, but it's something that we're really practicing. The American poet Robert Frost captures what mindfulness does when he says, the best way out is always through. So it's really about moving through these challenging circumstances and emotions with great acceptance, which seems appropriate with the consequences of COVID right now. So I know that for me, it sometimes feels like the engine is moving faster than it was pre-COVID, and where everyone is getting into complete overdrive in order to play catch up, and everyone is just so busy. And it can feel very frantic for students, teachers, and parents alike. And this, of course, also leads to feeling more overwhelmed, less regulated, and a lot of burnout. So this is something that we really are working on bringing more predominantly into the junior school so that we can hopefully see some positive effects.
So what we are increasingly acknowledging is the people who are delivering the academic support, which is our teachers and therapists involved. And at this time, we're realizing that they are facing significant burnout due to all these demands. And when teachers or therapists are stressed and snappy with students, they can also shut down parts of their students' brain. So in many cases, when emotions become overblown, parts of the brain in charge of executive function, such as the prefrontal cortex, tend to not communicate as well with the emotional parts of the brain, which is the limbic system. And this ends up overriding executive functioning circuit. And this can really affect a child's ability to focus and control impulses, why we're seeing a lot of that self-regulation, struggling with that. So we need to focus on an approach that crosses student and all staff to address the stress that underlines these academic, social, and emotional demands. And we are seeing positive results with teachers who are successfully implementing and practicing mindfulness. I think we like mindfulness so much because you can just use it anywhere and through a lot of different strategies. So for some, that might just mean taking a meditative practice, or it can be helpful to just practice mindful walking or running. You can even make a cup of tea or a pot of coffee in a mindful way, something to slow down your rooms of thinking and worrying ahead. And I know a lot of teachers have said to me, but how are we going to fit it into our day? But that's why we love it. It's simply because you can practice it anywhere. It's just about taking a pause during the day and just being able to find a moment. And when we bring it into the classroom and into the curriculum, that's when we see the most positive results for students and for teachers. So as you can see here, the MRI scans actually show how these mindful activities activate that prefrontal cortex, which is the executive functioning part of the brain. And this brings back a state of calmness and presence, so the child is able to focus and learn more effectively. When their working memory, working memory is part of that executive functioning, and when anxiety is affecting that, children can't learn effectively. They can't hold things in their memory. So we really need to bring them back into that calm space so that we can incorporate that into their working memory, which can then store things in their long-term memory. This practice is also really linked to lots of health benefits. So they say that it lowers levels of perceived stress, anxiety, and depression. It improves one's general sense of well-being, their resilience, and also their immune system. So hopefully we will get to the point of reducing absenteeism from students and teachers so that they're stronger and more able to cope with the stress. But also we are really hoping that we can see an improvement in the relationships between our students, as they've really missed out so much socially during this time through being online. And I think this could also, with the impulsivity, that can also affect their relationships. So we're hoping that this can also, as they start to regulate a bit more, start to build better relationships and engage better back in person with each other. So yeah.
So when compared to local and global stats, we can see that this isn't something unique to our school. And of course, it's being seen across the board at present, and something that each school is having to manage and grapple with so that we can reduce the social and psychological effects of the pandemic, which we have had on our children and learning. Cognitively, emotionally, psychologically, on every level. So this presentation was intended to just be a bird's eye view of our strategy to address COVID and the students who need additional support at this time. It is, of course, a very multi-layered and very multifaceted approach. And for us, we know that our strategies are not perfect. And one of the things we are needing to address is the expectations on our students and on our teachers. It will take time to reduce the gaps in learning, and we aren't there quite yet. So we do need to be patient with our students, our teachers, and our therapists, and even ourselves. We would, of course, love to hear your experiences and what you've been working on in your schools. So, and we know that there have been so many positive outcomes from COVID on academics, especially with the online world. But it comes with its pros and cons, and there's so much importance in terms of in-person teaching and therapy on a child's holistic development. So we are really hoping that in this last little bit, we can share some ideas. We also will attend to some of the questions if there are any on the chats, and to get together, just share some ideas so that we can help make this recovery time as easy and as swift as possible.
But also just to mention, as Stanford education professor Reardon actually said, he said, when you have a massive crisis, the worst effects end up being felt by the people with the least resources. And I know that we in our school community felt shockwaves from COVID, but there are so many schools who have actually been very hard hit in our local communities. And really, I think that's something we also need to think about and consider as how do we share resources, how do we share ideas so we can assist these schools. So yes, that's something that we really want to think about and plan for as next year. But we'd also love to hear your ideas around this. So please do share with us some of your ideas.
So Anna, maybe we should go through some of the questions and see what we can address as well.
Yes, that sounds like a good idea. Sure. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll up. So what does Rita say about where our children are holding in their academic development? So yes, it seems like it depends on the schools and when they manage to come back online. But sorry, Kim, I just see that we are we still stuck on the Kagan cooperative learning slide? I think we are.
We should be on conclusion.
Oh, okay. This may be just my slide. So the research, it depends on where your school is at, and how quickly they came back online and what methods came in place. But they're saying that, so in the UNICEF, it said that the schools were 75% of schools in South Africa were a year behind, which is quite significant. So there's a lot of catching up to do. I think it does depend though on the nature of the schools, because we know that some schools, as we said, were harder hit than others. But generally in America as well, they were saying it was like 19 weeks that some of the schools were behind, which amounts to quite significantly behind.
Yeah. And I think that kind of ties into the question about the students who are strong in learning areas and extension. So on the one hand, we've got the learners that are more behind, and then we've got the learners that are needing the extension. And I think that, again, that's our teachers work very closely with the multidisciplinary team, and we meet regularly to see where are the learners in the classroom. Do we need to hand out extra work? Do we need to up certain things? So it's very much, you know, it's a case by case. So in terms of how strong they are, I think it would depend on the class itself. We're also quite specific with how we put our classes together, and we think very carefully about the teachers that go with the different types of learners, because we know that different personalities work well with different types of teachers. So I think, Lindy, I don't know if this answers your question, but how strong, I think, would just depend on the pace and where the class is at. Obviously, we need to follow the curriculum, but we often say to parents that we're not sure where we're at, if we should consolidate, should we go ahead, and we always say extension is very, very important for us, so we do whatever we can. So I hope that answers.
Yeah. So it's 54% learning losses in South African schools, so that's quite significant. Somebody was also asking, who do we do our mindfulness training through? Well, we're doing it through the Mindfulness in Schools project, which is a UK-based mindfulness institute. So what that involves, and I know somebody said how much, we're supposed to practice 20 minutes a day. And this is like an 8-week program initially, and then you go into the Mindfulness in Schools, and we're going to be doing the Pause B program for that, which is covering foundation and InterCen. So that's
really...
sorry.
No, so sorry, Anna. So, but we really are. We've looked and we've researched, and there are some beautiful, resources. Some of them are free courses, and this is just what kind of speaks to our to where we're sitting at. And I think, Ari, just to answer your question in terms of the self-regulation in the space, is the idea of starting the day with this mindfulness and the breaks throughout the day. We also work very hard on empowering our teachers and our parents in terms of age-appropriate strategies. So we start off with, what is the challenge? Why are you feeling so dysregulated? What is the empathetic language that we should be using? Building up on that empathetic understanding and development. So we still have to remember that with some of our little ones, they're still little, and there's certain things that they're not supposed to know yet. So we try, and again, we do a lot of parental support, teacher support. How do we build up this language in the classroom, which in reality is something that we would have had to do even without COVID. But I think that in terms of the self-regulation space, every teacher works with their class. So whether it's about working with specific language, if it's about positioning them with the support of our OT on perhaps a type of chair or that will help them to sensory regulate. So there's a big difference also between that emotional regulation, the sensory regulation, and we really try and identify case by case. We also offer play therapy. We are 4 psychologists in the school, from preschool to the senior school. So we work with what we can on school-based therapy. And of course, if we need to refer out and work with other professionals, breathing is very, very important. So it's just those pause breaks. So yeah, I mean, please be in touch if anyone wants to chat a little bit more about these programs. Anna and I have just been on a journey of trying to figure out what would be best. We also rely quite heavily on presentations that we give our parents and our staff. So we send out weekly resources for presentations where we also discuss and we get feedback and we work with actual cases. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly. I think that in terms of the teachers practicing their own mindfulness training, and then something that we can incorporate into our wellness curriculum, because we do run our wellness curriculum throughout the junior school. And that's something we're going to be bringing in, and we do already bring in, but more as we get further into the mindfulness in schools project. So it's something we really want to look and see and monitor and track the changes and see how it manages that self-regulation and what we do notice and what changes we do notice with the learners when we bring it in. So
and part of our wellness curriculum is we go into the classroom. Anna and I go into the classroom when we can, and we deal with the different topics. And but we also go in and we work with self-regulation, mindfulness as a topic. So whether we're working on the different areas of wellness, this has become an area of wellness that we now implement in the classroom as a class, as a bigger class. Sorry, Anna, I interrupted you.
I just wanted to know also, just to say, somebody asked, which reading assessment do you use for the grade 4s to 7s? That I do want to find out as well. I'm not entirely sure. The teachers run those, and I think it might differ between the different grades. Can I get back to you and send that through? I'll let you know which ones the teachers are using as their baseline assessments.
We do also rely quite heavily when we need to send referral for psychoeducation assessments, and often taking from the scholastic levels, but that's also when we rely quite heavily on our learning support and ILP, because there's also a lot of the CBA and other standardized screenings that we use. But yeah, let's definitely get back to that one. Kagan is KAG.
Sorry, there was another question about, does your department decide or become involved in class placement? If you would like to speak to that.
Would you like to speak to that, Kim?
Sorry, there was a huge thing of thunder. Does the class?
Sorry.
I think it's to do with our class lists, the class placements. So we do get involved in the class placements. The teachers typically draw up their class lists, but we go through those class lists before they are signed off. So where we can see children who are really struggling for one reason or another, we can also decide which class teacher would better suit that particular student. So that is something that we do get involved in, if that answers the question. it's quite a process because it goes through the teachers, the deputies, and then through us as well, and we all have to sign it off.
For the older girls, we also give them an opportunity to write down who their like top however many friends are. And we try and incorporate also who they feel
They have to
close
have one friend.
Yeah,
They
and
have to have
that's
at least one friend.
and that's a connection that we try and keep. But we also have to think, you know, about the classroom environment, and what is the most supportive. And there are we're aware, and it's great. We've got different types of teachers. We're all different personalities, and some children just really sit really, really well with certain teachers. So we actually quite heavily involved in that process, even from the preschool going into grade naught. And the senior school, obviously, it looks a little bit different. Okay.
Yeah, I can see that there was a great deal more anxiety, less independence and confidence when back in the classroom. Definitely. That's something that I think we spoke to as well, what we're seeing as well. And I think that's, again, what we just think that's why we just need to manage those expectations. And even today, our girls are writing their exams. And we were talking about, well, we want to see what the results are, but we've got to remind ourselves that actually they've been through a lot. So we've just got to take it in our stride and be realistic with ourselves and with our students, and try and just boost their confidence as much at this stage as possible. So I think that is all being taken into consideration as we undergo our examinations as well, because we don't want to deflate our students. We also want to build them up as much as possible. So our teachers are still bearing all of that in mind and just trying to help our students to just feel confident again.
And we do go into the classroom also, and we'll give exams, anxiety study tips, and we are available on a one-on-one for those individual therapies. Caitlin and Angela, I see that you've answered a lot of questions in terms of the different assessments that we use. So thank you for that. Just being cognizant of time, I think that we just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity. Anna and I are here. We're available if anyone wants to chat some more. And we really would love to hear from you as well as to what strategies you're using and what you're finding effective. So Anna, I don't know if you want to just over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for everyone who joined us today. It was really wonderful, and thank you. Please do continue to share your experiences and what's been working for you. I think, as I said, it's great when we can learn from each other, and we don't have all the answers, and we're still trying to figure out and plot along and figure it all out and discovering gaps and learning. So it would be really nice to have some feedback from you on what's been working with you, or ideas that you could share as well. That'd be really fantastic. So thank you. Thanks for all joining us today.
And thank you, Helen.
Yeah, and thank you also to Jackie, who's been helping to man the chats. Jackie's our senior school psychologist, so she was on helping with the chat. So thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Caitlin and Angela. And thank you, Helen.
Pleasure, guys. That was really valuable. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And look forward to sharing the recording. Appreciate it.
Such a pleasure.
Great,
have a
thanks.
good day, everyone.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Okay. Bye. And don't forget the Professional Minds post-COVID consequence if you also want to hear what that comes out with, because I think that'll also be very valuable for those of you who missed that. Okay. Thanks.
Perfect.